I'm Honor Barrett,
And I am Chloe Cobb.
and welcome to Young Adult Reviews. Did we want to say our first and last name? Or
I just wanted to do my first name, but then you said your last name and you made it weird.
Yeah, I did. Should we do it one last time?
Okay, one more time.
Hello, and welcome to Young Adult Reviews, where youngish adults review books meant for much younger adults.
Or children.
I'm Honor.
And I'm Chloe, and this week we are discussing The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. And if you haven't read it yet, here's the spoiler warning.
You have been warned.
The Mysterious Benedict Society is a 3-book series with a 4th book after that takes place in an undetermined amount of years in the future, but like Constance is a teenager, so we know that quite a bit of time has passed. And then there's also a prequel, which has taken place beforehand. We're primarily going to be discussing just the original 3 books that came out in a little bit before 2010, right? Like 2007, 2009 is when the 3 books, the first original 3 came out. So in the first book, these children are assembled by taking these series of tests. It's obvious that they're like kind of exceptional in many different ways. We have Rainey Muldoon, who is our main character. Throughout the story, you kind of like see him form to be the leader and moral center of this group that they name the Mysterious Benedict Society. We also have Kate Weatherall, who is extremely gifted in terms of athleticism. She joined the circus from a very young age, so that's how they explain that, which I think it's very fun. It's very cute. And then we also have Sticky Washington, who has an amazing memory, extremely intelligent. He definitely like fills the role of like the intellect and brainiac in the group. Then we have Constance Contrer, who you find out at the end of the first book is actually a 2-year-old the whole time, where everyone else is like preteen, 10 to 12 range. But Constance is a toddler. We're going to talk about her a little bit later. She starts out as this kind of stubborn, cranky person. And that's kind of her role for the first book. And they go and infiltrate this school, who they later find is run by Drop the Curtain. And what he is doing is using a machine called the Whisperer, which turns out to be a main plot point throughout the rest of the series. And he's using it to stir up civil unrest by promoting political emergencies that aren't really happening. So his whole thing is like illusions and control, which is a very interesting theme for a villain, I will say. But they have to infiltrate his school, take down the Whisperer, and essentially send him into hiding by the end of the book. First book, pretty enjoyable, I will say. I think I like that one the best upon the reread.
Yeah, it's really good. I think I actually liked the second one the best because I thought it was a little more interesting because they traveled a lot more. So there was a lot happening with that, and they were all kind of on their own. So the second book follows the first book about 6 months later. 6 months to a year. I don't think they ever specify exactly how long.
I think it's a year.
Yeah.
I want to say a year.
A year later. And Mr. Benedict has basically set up like a scavenger hunt where they're going to all like find and solve these clues that he's left them to get to this location. It's kind of across the world to go find him. And he set this up in advance. He's got all their parents and stuff to agree to it. And it's just kind of to get the kids back together and do something that's enjoyable, but also boosts kind of their intellect and gets them to use all their creative minds in the best way possible. Only there is a twist, and Mr. Benedict gets kidnapped by his evil doppelganger brother, Mr. Curtin. And so the 4 children decide that they are going to go follow these clues and find out where Mr. Benedict is before problems arise and Mr. Curtin decides to harm Mr. Benedict. This whole time, you find out that they're going after these special flowers that help to get rid of narcolepsy, which both Mr. Benedict and Mr. Curtin have, but they also have an evil effect that if used, you can put like an entire town to sleep. So there's a lot of danger with this. Mr. Curtin has a lot of bad men, which they call the 10 men, because they have 10 different ways to hurt you, that are all kind of out searching for the kids. And so there's all the danger of the kids trying to evade these 10 men and find and solve Mr. Benedict's scavenger hunt. And I thought it was just really enjoyable because it was fun to see all the new locations and to really see how far the children could push themselves through the story.
Yeah. And then after the second book, the third book, I believe, almost immediately follows it. The third book, oh my God, I thought the pacing was so slow in the beginning. I had so much trouble getting through the first like 100 pages.
I definitely felt like this one was a lot slower than the other two, than the first two.
Yeah. But when I was younger, I felt like it was my favorite. basically, I would say that they're just kind of like living in the house and hiding. And then one day, a very rich character who was a character in the second book, Mr. Precious, comes and claims to be Constance's father. Of course, like he's not. And she was like, I have to know for sure though. So Mr. Benedict is now in possession of the Whisper from the first book, which it can be used to take people's memories away and also to give them back. And she's like, I need you to find these memories that I've buried because all of these children have like a lot of trauma, which is like terrible. But they do be having trauma. So Mr. Benedict uses it to find it and finds that Constance is an orphan. But she's kind of upset to like realize this because she was going to be sold to Mr. Curtin to be used at his school, which is like, I have some things to say about that process because the setup of the scene is like this under the table adoption where they're giving the lady who runs the group home like a briefcase full of money to send this small girl to a rich, reclusive billionaire man. I don't know what kind of world they're living in where the horrific implications of that like aren't a thing or where like they're willing to turn like the other cheek. But that is horrifying. That would never like cross my mind as like a child, of course. And of course, like these are children's books, but like as an adult and like realizing an adult is making those decisions, what the fuck? What the fuck?
Yeah, there's a lot of really bad themes like that along the whole way.
Yeah, we can go back to trauma later, but basically after that, Constance runs away. The kids pursue them. Basically, they follow the 10 men into this perfect trap that they knew that they'd pursue because that's just the kind of people they are. They end up in this prison. They have to prison break with the help of Mr. Benedict, number 2, Rhonda Kazembe, and Milligan, of course. They come and help break them out, and they help each other. It's very cute. It's very touching. Another thing that happens in book 3 is that when Mr. Curtin realizes that Mr. Benedict has disabled the Whisperer, he tries to kill himself like 3 different times. And SQ, who was one of his former executives from the Institute, and he kind of loves him like a son, and SQ loves him like a father. It's like not a very healthy relationship, but it's certainly like a parental kind of relationship. And SQ saves him as an act of love kind of thing, which is super cute. But also did not pick up on Mr. Curtin trying to like kill himself by like crushing himself to death when I was a child. So that's something else. The end's all cute. They find Constance's papers and some books that survived from the fire in the library that she lived in after she ran away from the 10 men. Happily ever after. Like, what can you say? I don't think the 4th book was necessarily needed to like draw this kind of story to a close, but it's cute.
No, I think they nicely wrapped it up, especially because Mr. Benedict got to adopt Constance, which they've been trying to do since the end of the first book. And everybody got a place in Mr. Benedict's house, or like in the, I think Sticky moved into the house across the street. So everyone had a place like nearby. So it was kind of like, okay, they got to finish off their teenage childhood years.
Milligan retires, so he's not like risking his neck every day.
Yep. So it was a really, really nice round off to the series. And I thought as a child that was where it ended. I didn't know until we decided to read it that there was a 4th book.
Well, it came out quite recently, right? Like, I want to say 2019.
Oh, I have no idea.
I want to say it came out almost 10 plus years after the original trilogy was published.
Yeah, even with that, so they have it, the 4th book is kind of set into the future, an undetermined amount of years afterwards. They never specify how old any of them are. Constance actually has like red hair now, so she dyes her hair, and it's cute. She would
have a rebellious phase.
She absolutely would. She wears Mr. Benedict's old green plaid suit, which I thought was funny because at the end of the 3rd book, she writes a whole poem about how she hates the green plaid.
Well, you know, she's wearing that's how she shows love.
Yeah.
Also, she's punk. She's punk. I love her.
But essentially the story with this book is all of the 10 men have escaped prison, and they're kind of loose in Stone Town and stirring up a lot of trouble. And one of the main 10 men, McCracken, who's hardest 10 men to fight because he's big boss.
He will kill a child.
Will kill a child.
He will put a bullet in their head.
Yeah.
For sure.
He is using another telepath had her mind wiped by the Whisperer and hadn't been found by Mr. Benedict and given her memories back, uses her to use her telepathic powers to search for Constance, who then has to basically use all her mental abilities to block and confuse the mind reader. And throughout all of this, they find a third mind reader who is a 5-year-old child called Ty. And so Constance brings Ty to her, and they're trying to protect Ty and Constance and everybody going on. And during this time, Mr. Benedict had gone to see Mr. Curtin, and they basically both get poisoned, and Mr. Curtin is using that against the children for them to bring like a bunch of things that he wants to him and let him out of prison. And so it's just it's very weird, very strange, kind of an unnecessary book, but it is a fun one, I think. Still, it's interesting to see the development of how they kind of grew together.
I think it's nice to like see these beloved characters that honestly with like how the books were published, you almost grew with. Because especially like if you read them in your youth, like you did, like we did at our ages. I don't know when you read them. I read them in maybe like 3rd or 4th grade. So I was like younger than these kids, same age as these kids.
Yeah, I was about 4th or 5th.
Like now I'm older, and like I can imagine that they have like I have grown with them, which I think it's super sweet. Like that's all I have to say about that. I feel like it was definitely a book that was written for the kids that read them, who are now adults, kind of thing. And like not to be self-centered, that's just like how I feel. Not to like the world revolves around me. But I feel like that's one way of looking at it. Not that you couldn't enjoy it if you like read all 4 of them in quick succession as like a child today. But that's just how I viewed it as an adult.
No, I agree with that. I think it's nice to follow it as they were kind of aging too. And then there is a 5th book also, and that one is almost like a prequel because it tells Mr. Benedict's story. And I haven't read that, so I don't know exactly what it's about, but it is a good little addition to the
He was in the Navy, right? They mentioned that in like the 2nd book.
Yeah, he was in the Navy because he worked with the ships.
Captain Nolan.
Captain Nolan, yeah. He worked with Captain Nolan in the Navy.
They kissed, whatever. Keep scrolling. I don't know if they kissed or not. I didn't read it either.
I doubt they did.
Honor, it's the Navy.
It is the Navy, but it's also a children's book set in 2008.
Radicalize the children. I said what I said.
You said what you said.
It's Pride Month, Honor.
It is.
Not during Pride Month.
Okay, I'll take my realism out of it. They kissed.
They kissed in the Navy. I didn't read the book.
Well, you didn't really have to. They talked about them being in the Navy in the 2nd one, so.
Yeah, and he said that they kissed. They like snuck it in. It was subtext. It was like written really tiny in between like 2 lines of text.
It was in Morse code?
Yeah, it was in Morse code.
I read this book series as a child. I read all 3 of them, and I could not for the life of me remember most of what happened in them. I remember that they all kind of did the tests and they got into the Mysterious Benedict Society, like, group. And I remember that one of the books they went on like the boat and were in the boat for a while, which is the 2nd book. But that's about it.
I'll tell you what I remember. I remembered the names of the main characters. I remembered her father was Milligan, the secret agent, of course. And I remembered, so the main antagonist of this series is a man named Ladrop the Curtain, who is the evil twin brother of Nicholas Benedict, the namesake of the Mysterious Benedict Society. I did not remember him.
I didn't either.
You think you'd remember the evil twin trope for like the big bad of like the series? Nothing. I did not remember. You know what I did remember though? I remember the 10 men.
Did you really?
I did remember the 10 men. I don't know what it was about them that stuck around. Is like I thought like in my head I was like, oh, they weren't the main antagonist, but they were like tangential to it. But something about them just stuck in my mind. I don't know what it is, but I thought they were like the big bads of the.
It's because they're the ones that are mainly faced the whole time for an antagonist. They're the ones that are like being fought against.
Yeah, like Mr. Curtain, if you will, is the man behind the curtain.
I was gonna make that joke too.
But yeah, like the 10 men are definitely like the men on the ground, and that's That's what I remembered the most, I feel like. I didn't remember anything else. Since you've read this as like, well, we both read this as like children, what has changed about the way that you're perceiving this book as like an adult now?
I felt like I enjoyed it just as much, but I felt like I was questioning it a lot more, like kind of the realism of it. Mostly because just like the actions that they would do, I was like, okay, even smart kids don't do that. For example, in the third book, one of the main plot points is that Constance, the start as 2-year-old, is now a 4-year-old in this book. She can read minds and she starts to be able to like project her thoughts, basically has telepathic abilities. And I was like, that's too far. That's not realistic at all, even for gifted kids. Like it just pushed the boundary.
Yeah, because okay, so let's talk about Constance. Let's talk about Constance. So it starts out just being her this like you don't really understand what's so special about her, and then at the end of the first book it's like this bombshell that they drop where it's like, oh, she's actually been two this whole time, and you're like, what? That's
You're like,
crazy.
that explains her crankiness.
That explains literally everything about her. So then you understand, like, it's like, oh, that's why she's gifted. And then she starts to see patterns. And it seems like she's psychic, but it's like, oh, you're just really good at like picking up on patterns. And then the third book, it's like, no, you're actually a psychic.
Yeah, see the pattern thing I was able to go along with, because I was like, okay, yeah, I could see how someone who's super insanely smart would start to pick up on patterns and maybe not realize it. That's realistic, that's understandable. And then when the third book came around and they were starting to go, okay, well, she has these telepathic abilities, I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. And I started to think, well, maybe it happened because she put herself in the Whisperer and fought Mr. Curtin in the first book. I was like, maybe because she had so much like a connection with the Whisperer that it caused some development like that. But the interesting thing is in the fourth book, they bring in 2 other people who have these telepathic abilities, which makes it clear that it's not because of the Whisperer.
So there are just telepaths in
They're
this
just
world?
telepaths.
No, okay, so here's my thing. The way that they kind of introduce Constance's telepathy is almost like a Deus ex machina plot device. And they like rely on her for many of these plans to follow through. And without that, it would have been very near impossible. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it did kind of take me out of the grounded reality of the world. That's just my stance on it. I enjoyed it. It was just kind of like, okay, it feels like you're kind of taking this easy way out, giving Constance kind of like these OP powers. Like Kate runs really good. Rainey's like the moral center. Sticky's really smart. Constance is a fucking psychic. Like, I guess as a team, I guess it makes sense, but also for a world that did not really expound upon any magical or supernatural abilities, it came totally out of left field.
Well, and the other thing is I feel like without that, Constance, while she is incredibly smart for a 2-year-old, she wouldn't really have had anything that made her that helpful for the group, because she was so young and she, was so cranky and she didn't really help other than that. So it kind of gave her a usefulness to the group, but it did feel forced.
I would agree with that because in the first book, how Constance really like shone out her time to shine like, at the end when got into the Whisper and she was sitting there kind of just being stubborn. And being stubborn was her contribution to the team. That's fine. Like I'm down with that. I thought it was like really cute how they included her like that. But
it was very fitting too, because that was like her whole thing the entire book. But I felt like after that point they couldn't use that as easily for her character, so they brought in this whole new device.
No, for sure. I will say Constance is the one character whose ability consistently grow throughout every book, because in the first book it was her stubbornness, in the second book it was her pattern seeking, and in the third book it was her telepathy. And everyone else is kind of
it's all the same old tricks.
Yeah, same tricks, old dog. Constance was just like the one person that was consistently growing throughout the series, which like I see the natural progression, but then again you kind of burst through that wall of perceived reality because everything else was like very much based in science. Or like I don't know if it's like real science, but like science in air quotes.
Yes.
In terms of like the radio waves and how the Whisperer worked in the first place kind of thing.
The other thing is it could be that she developed so much because she was so young, because children that are that young just develop that much in general. So it could be that's why she had a greater growth in her abilities versus the others who had already had that growth and development.
That is true. I'd like to talk about Kate's trauma next. So her sad backstory is that her mom is dead and her dad left her at a very young age, doesn't know where she went. So she got like sent to live in this orphanage. You later find out that he was a secret agent who got his mind wiped by the Whisperer from Mr. Curtin, who later like he manages to escape from the island and goes to work for Mr. Benedict, but he still doesn't have his memories back, so he can't get back to his daughter. So she's like living in an orphanage, running away to join the circus every few weeks. And eventually they just let her join the circus. I feel like that's not even the worst of her trauma though. Because in the first book, she just gets the shit kicked out of her. Like her whole body is covered in like blood and bruises. And I'm like,
And
what?
the thing that is interesting to me is she takes it kind of normally. She accepted that. It wasn't like, oh my god, I just got the shit kicked out of me. It was like, yeah, okay, that's another Tuesday. Look how
No,
cool
for sure.
I am.
Kate can definitely take a beating. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing though. I'm kind of scared for her. She was like happy about it, and then she's like happy to do my part, and I'm like, your body's gonna turn on you in like 5 years, girly. Like I don't know what to tell you.
It doesn't though. She's just as agile in the fourth book.
Oh, I know.
What's interesting to me is all of the things that she went through only led her more towards like her final goal of like she wanted to be an agent like Milligan was, and she saw the danger that he went through because he went and found all of these people and he would protect them from the Tin Men, and he was always getting hurt. And I think in the third book, he fell off a cliff and they thought he was dead, and she went through all of that heartbreak and saw all of the trauma that he went through, and she went, yeah, I still want to do that. Her bravery is like unbound.
Kate thought that she lost her father like 5 different times just over the course of the series, which I think is terrifying. And like, of course, Milligan always comes back. Milligan always, like, that's just how it is.
It's a kid's book, yeah.
But damn, Kate, you good?
She was in fact not good.
I have a line that I want to read from the end of the third book. Well, not exactly the end. This is from the SQ Redemption arc, which I was rooting for since book 1. I was rooting for that since book 1. So SQ is finally making his stand, the penultimate moment of his redemption arc, and he says, I'll help you get away, Mr. Curtin. I don't want anything to happen to you. I'll help you escape, but I'm not touching these children. Mr. Curtin let loose a shriek of outrage. Then I'll touch them.
Mr. Curtin said so many messed up things because I remember specifically reading through the first book, how he talked about literally manipulating children. Like he had mentioned that, and he mentioned grooming them, which is exactly what he did.
No, he used the word grooming, which is like
yeah, it's really bad. But it's interesting to me how bad those things are that I didn't pick up on as a child, and I think that's one of the things that makes these series good enough to read as an adult and still keeps it entertaining, is because there are these overarching themes that are like, holy crap. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like, of course, it's like not the reality of what's happening, but it's the reality of like what could be happening and what does happen in like the real world, which is terrifying.
Realistic situations in a fictional book.
It's kind of like those jokes that they put in children's shows and movies that like aren't for the children, they're for the parents whose children drag them there. Like, even though we're not getting dragged there, we still like understand. And it's like, oh, that's terrifying. Yeah, Mr. Curtin was kind of a gaslight gatekeep girl boss.
Oh, he definitely was.
There was
no kind of.
Let's talk about the mentorship role that Mr. Curtin played on Rainey. I would like to talk about that. Yeah, because I think it's especially prominent in the first book, and they kind of dropped it in like the second book a little bit in the third book, but like,
well, I think because they didn't have as much close interaction as they had in that first book.
That is true, but I feel like it would still like fuck him up, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think it was also really hard because Mr. Curtin and Mr. Benedict looked exactly alike. They wore the same things. They had the same face. The only difference was one was in a wheelchair and was mean.
But yeah, like I feel like it's also important to remember where it's like Rainey, of course, like doesn't really have parents, and like at the end of the first book, his tutor adopts him, and it's like very sweet. And he has like this mother figure, but he doesn't really have a father figure quite. So I feel like he might have found that in like Mr. Benedict as well as Mr. Curtin when he was in the Institute still with him. Because Rainey also finds himself, Rainey's kind of, I guess, like gatekeep girl boss too.
Mm.
Because there's that moment in the second book where he takes the walkie-talkie without telling anyone because he like doesn't trust Captain Nolan on like a whim and he throws it out the train window and everyone's like, what the fuck? Like same energy as in Blair Witch Project when they throw the map in the river and they're like, what the fuck? But it's like, and he like didn't talk to anyone about it. He didn't process it with anyone. He was just kind of like, you should trust me on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And then they call him on it and he's like, oh, okay. Which like respect to him, but I do kind of like he's the moral center, but also he faces moral struggles of his own, which I thought was an interesting character arc for him.
They all face the struggles. It's really
Oh, for sure.
interesting. And especially in the fourth book, they focus on that more because, well, even in the third book, you see the Sticky kind of becoming jealous of Rennie. And the fact that people always like look to him for advice and like that Sticky's like, I could figure this out too.
Maybe
You could
shouldn't be
ask
such a
me.
square then. I'll say it. In the fourth book, he's not a kid anymore. I can roast him as much as I want.
Exactly. But it's interesting to see the relationships and how they all kind of are jealous of each other's gifts and don't really recognize that they have gifts that could be perceived as something to be jealous of.
Right, because I feel like in the first book, or the original trilogy, they're very much like, oh, we all have different abilities and that's what makes us a greater team.
Mm-hmm.
But like in the fourth book, it really sounds like they're struggling more with like what they don't have rather than what they have, which I think is an interesting way to switch up the original like moral dilemmas of the original trilogy.
Yeah, it's also because they're kind of facing the idea of going kind of to college and separating, going their own separate ways sort of thing. And so they're realizing that they're going to have futures without each other, constantly there. So I think that's why it's becoming more relevant in that book in particular.
Yeah, and it also kind of becomes this conversation of interpersonal relationships, kind of like they go on like one last adventure, then they have to part ways kind of thing. And it's coming to terms with that. And I feel like more so than anything, the fourth book is definitely a coming of age book.
Mm-hmm.
Or like more so than any of the previous books in the series, just because of that aspect of like, I need to grow up and mature in this way. Because I feel like the first three books, like it's very much like we are children and that is a strength and we should use that. But in the fourth book, it's like we have to become adults kind of thing.
Well, and it's also they almost have forgotten the fact that they work better as a team.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first three books, they start off with kind of like not quite fitting together and then they, sync up as a team again and they're all like, yeah, this is how we work best. And then of course the next book they've kind of fallen apart again and they put themselves back together. But this one it's very clear that there's stronger divides between all of them. Mm-hmm. Even with the underlying fact that they're all essentially have more of a sibling relationship because they grew up together.
For sure. And I think I don't know, because in the first three books, the most interpersonal conflict we got was with like the three, like Sticky, Kate, and Rainey versus Constance. And then there was that moment in the second book when Sticky was being annoying and being just kind of like a know-it-all, and they were like, "Shut up," and they like kind of roasted him for it. But mostly, like Constance is like the
odd man out,
if you will, in terms of someone who everyone butts heads with, kind of thing. But it's like, oh, that's just Constance. So when they kind of like meet this conflict with each other, they don't really know how to handle it.
Yeah, I agree. It's especially hard, I think, for Constance also because she was kind of the odd one out. They all kind of were their own trio, and then it was with Constance also.
Yeah, it's like, and Constance is here, if you will. It's like in the Schuyler Sisters, and it's like Angelica,
and Peggy,
Eliza, and Constance. And Constance. Not to make a Hamilton reference in the year of our Lord 2021, but
we're doing it.
I made a Hamilton reference in the year of our Lord 2021.
Yeah, I think it was more obvious in the first book that they had that divide, and it kind of grew a little bit. Like it wasn't as drastic in the second and third ones. So that was interesting to see that development over time. And I think it's because Constance became more useful, like she started to grow up.
That's true, but also I feel like in the first book, I think their patience was shorter with her because they thought that she was like 10, 11, 12, and not a
Yeah.
literal 2-year-old. Because after they figured out she was a 2-year-old, they were like more patient with her. It's like, oh, of course she's sleepy all the time. Of course she's cranky all the time. She's a fucking toddler, you know?
I love, first off, that Mr. Benedict didn't explain that to them before they left. And I love,
Why did
second of
Constance
off,
explain it to them?
I think she was embarrassed about it because even when they talked about birthdays, she was very much like, did not want to tell them when her birthday was, like, avoided it as much as possible.
She was super defensive about it for sure.
Mhm.
I love that she's a Capricorn, though. We have 2 Capricorns in the mysterious Benedict society.
But I love that they literally describe her as the size of a fire hydrant, and the rest of them are like, oh yeah, she's like 10, 11, 12, like our age, like maybe 8, you know? And she's like, no, she's 2.
No,
She's
because like literally, like Rainey saw her and he's like, "Damn, it must be so hard being so much smaller than the other kids." Anyway,
I busted up laughing when they said she was the size of a fire hydrant.
well, I think the point of that like metaphor was also because she looked like a fire hydrant as well, due to
She did.
her rain boots and her raincoat.
Dude, there's so many funny lines and like absolutely messed up lines in this whole series.
There are so many zingers, but then there are also like something that I liked about what the author did was that he was like also real in that not every line can be a zinger, and the other characters would comment on it. They'd be like, "That one sucked," and it'd be like, "Shut up," because it's like I don't know. I feel like that relationship was especially strong in the first book because they didn't feel like they were like, oh yeah, this is dangerous, but like our lives aren't in danger. And then like in the second and third books, they were like freaking out too much to really kind of have that banter with each other. But the
Mhm.
banter in the first book really made it seem like a sibling relationship.
So, okay,
Um,
so we went over Kate's trauma. We went over Constance's trauma. So, should we do Sticky next?
Sticky literally could have just talked to his parents. That's all I
Well,
have to say about
yes,
that.
that's very true. But also, they were being affected by the Whisperer. And they weren't, he did try to talk to them because he explained that he stopped wanting to do all of those quizzes and exams and things that his parents were having him do to earn money for them.
Hmm.
Because his parents were poor, and so when they found out he was super smart, he started taking all these competitions on tests and things to earn money for their family. But his parents got super greedy with it and kept pushing him to do more and more and more, which put a lot of pressure on him.
Hmm.
And so he started to say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And his parents were like, keep going. Like they ignored him. So
That is true.
while I think it was a very drastic response on his part to literally just run away, there definitely were better ways for him to get his point across. It did kind of work.
I would agree with that. Like, okay, and I will say, like, on the note of his response being kind of drastic, I feel like it's also fitting because he is, again, a child.
Hmm.
Um, so I feel
Yeah.
like it makes sense that he did that.
Most children joke about running away, they don't actually do it.
He said, "Watch me."
Well, they don't, I guess they don't really joke. They mean it, but they just don't do it.
Hmm.
They get like 2 feet down the street and they're like, actually, when's dinner?
It's like the thing where it's like, I'm not getting in the car when you're like in the grocery store, and then your parents are like, okay, and they start pulling away, and you're like, not yet. And then you start like banging on the car door, and then they stop and they let you in.
I
That kind
mean,
of thing. But Sticky went full send.
I think it's still very traumatic on his part that, his family then didn't look for him like he had expected them to. And understand that was part of the Whisperer's like mind messages that were
Hmm.
happening. But
Well, then later you do find out that they were looking for him
yeah,
after he actually ran away. Like,
he
wasn't just living in the cellar or whatever.
he just misheard them and took it the wrong way.
And they drove themselves into debt with like, it sounded like they had like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they drove themselves into debt in like, he was gone for like 3 weeks tops, I believe.
Ooh, it was longer than that because I thought
Was
they were
it?
at yeah, I thought they were on the island longer.
Were they on the island for like a month and a half?
Yeah, that's what I
Oh, okay.
thought. And then there was the time beforehand that he was already gone. So it was probably like 2-3 months, maybe.
Well, I believe he said that because there was a period of time where he had like run away in air quotes, but he was really just like living in a cellar that appeared to be boarded up in his house. And then he heard that conversation, and I think he said it had been about a week after he had actually run away from his home that he found the newspaper article and went to go take the test.
Okay, so it was about 2 months maybe then.
Yeah, 2 months tops. Like that's what I would say.
Guesstimating, yeah.
Shall we move on to Rainey's trauma?
Yes.
Okay, I think it is so interesting that Rainey is the main character, but we never really hear how he lost his parents. Like we hear for everyone else, like even Constance, it's like, oh, her parents died in a train crash, and it's like a throwaway line. But Rainey, we don't hear anything.
You just
So it really
know
like
that
makes
he's an
me
orphan.
wonder. Well, of course, it makes me wonder like what happened, but it's like, is it severe? What happened? Did they die, or did they just kind of like give him up? Kind of thing, because I think that would be a really interesting turn of events. And it's like, if they did give him up, does he know that? Does he even know what happened to his parents? I think there's that element of mystery. There's something about the orphan trope that so appeals to children. I don't know what it is, but it's like we have Harry Potter, we have Percy Jackson, where of course they have like one parent, but they also have like another parent who's like kind of like shrouded in mystery and we don't know, kind of thing. I don't know what it is that the orphan trope like so appeals to children. Do you think it's Disney?
Oh, that's quite a possibility. I think it's also the fact that children just like that idea that like a lot of those characters don't have the same rules and like stuff that we have, like because we have parents.
Like
Like,
the boxcar children kind of thing. It's
yeah.
like you're very rough and tumble, headstrong, living by your own rules
Yeah.
kind of
And so
thing.
I think they see something in that they're like, that's what I wish my life was like when their parents are being annoying, you know?
I would definitely agree with that, because even like after these kids get adopted, they like go off and do their own fucking thing regardless. They're like, they're gonna worry, so let's just not tell them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they leave.
That's always the
They
thing.
do still kind of like live by that lifestyle even after they have parents kind of like tying them down, if you will.
Right. And that's always the thing that was like interesting to me with characters like that is I really admired that they could go out and they could do all these things that they wanted to and that they believed was like right and they didn't have parents that were like that's dangerous, stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like looping back around to Rainey, I wonder if like him just being this kind of like nebulous orphan, if you will, let me use that term. That's like kind of like a weird term to use. But I wonder if that was like an intentional choice to allow the reader to project onto him,
Mhm.
kind of thing. Because like I feel like when I was a kid, I wanted to be Rainey, kind of thing. I feel like I knew I was sticky, but I wanted to be Rainey.
I wanted to be Kate because I thought she was so cool that she could do all these amazing things and
Oh, Kate is so cool.
I thought it was scary to just try to do a cartwheel, so
And Kate said circus.
literally. And the bucket was iconic.
Oh my god, her bucket is so iconic.
Last thing I want to mention about the characters is I feel like Rennie didn't really have any trauma like the others. Like his trauma was, oh, my orphanage director won't let me go to another school.
And also that he was
And I
like
don't have
kind of like
parents.
he was this person who was bullied and outcast because of his intellect, which I
That's
think is
true.
like another way, like another attempt to get the reader to kind of project onto him. Because I would imagine that the market for this books especially, or these books especially, something that like wasn't super mainstream, but it's like bookish kids would go for these books, kind of thing. People who are in the gifted program, people who probably like find solace in their books. So that was probably, if I had to like make a guess, the intent with making Rainey kind of this almost a blank canvas that he was in terms of his backstory and his struggles, because I think he was intended to be very relatable because of the types of kids reading these books. Like they identified with him. They identified with him in his struggles and also just like who they wanted to be as a person, I feel like.
I agree with that. I also found it funny because as a child, I didn't realize his name was Rennie. I thought it was Renee.
Renee.
Renee Muldoon. Rennie makes way more sense, but
his name is Reynard.
yeah.
It could be
That's what I thought
Rainey.
is, yeah, that's what I thought. But when I looked at it now, reading it again, I was like, wait a minute. I was like halfway through the first book when I realized, I was like, wait a minute. This is
It's not
not right.
Renee.
It's Rennie. And I Googled it just to make sure that I was correct and that I was wrong. And it was not a fun answer that I received.
Oh my god.
How did you think the pacing of the books were?
Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, I thought the pacing of the third book was not great for like the first 150 pages.
Mhm.
Like it did not take off until after they got kidnapped and they were already in the prison. And that's what I thought.
Yeah, I thought book one was really nice because, with the pacing, you got to learn who the characters were. You got to kind of see their relationships together. You got to see how they all developed and everything. And so, even when the pacing was slow in the book, there was an intrigue with learning about the characters and learning what was happening. With the second book, I felt like there was so much going on with the adventure that they were, constantly traveling. They were constantly going somewhere. It was a very evenly paced book. There wasn't any dips in it. But with the third book, I felt, especially after coming over the evenly pacedness of the second one, it was just really slow and it didn't grab my attention as much as the first two did.
I would absolutely agree with everything you just said. Yeah, because
Thank
I
you.
thought the first book was probably my favorite just because like I wasn't bored. Like I read it very quickly. I read it almost in one sitting. I really liked like the way that it introduced the characters and kind of the world that they lived in before like kind of throwing them into the fray. I
Mhm.
thought it was just like very well paced and kind of like the climax of the first book when they're like going back and forth between the character situations and it's like what's Kate up to? What's Constance up to? What's Rennie and Sticky up to because they were together at that time.
Mhm.
I thought that was like very interesting to see how it intersected and it was very cool to kind of like read about those like flash cuts between the scenes of action. I thought that the action in the first book especially was written exceedingly well. Second book was also pretty good. Third book, I don't know if this was just me, but I did not like the action sequences as much in the third book.
Yeah, I agree. I also felt like it was kind of a detract because it felt like they had gone from the whole world kind of being
Mm-hmm.
the setting to it going right back to Stonetown, and not just Stonetown, it was Mr. Benedict's house, the library, and the like trap that they had fallen into. So you had like three locations and it just felt very dull in all of them. And I think also part of it that dragged it down is because they were trapped in each location that they were at.
Mm-hmm. I didn't think about it like that, but I think that you're right. It's very much like, okay, we have to get out. And that's like the objective of the whole book. They are trying to get out of here. They are trying to get out of there. They are trying to get out of everywhere, essentially. And when they finally are out, it's like, okay, we have to follow them,
Mhm.
kind of thing. It's like, oh, we have to get information. We have to spy. The first book wasn't like that because it didn't feel like it was going through the motions. I felt like the third book was very much like going through the motions, which is maybe the idea because, of course, they trapped them in the prison in the first place because they were going through the motions and they were predictable. Like they knew exactly what they'd do. But I
Mhm.
feel that kind of backfired, like from a reader's perspective, because we could see exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
What'd you think about the ending?
Yeah, I thought it was good in the actual like complete end with how they all kind of decided they were going to be moving into the same like street basically. I think Kate and Rennie and Mr. Benedict were all in one house and Sticky was across the street. I think that was very nice because you got to see kind of their future of them growing up together and that they weren't going to be separated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the tie up of the book where they kind of had the defeat of Mr. Curtin and everything was like really rough. I think also because Mr. Curtin was trying to commit suicide and because you saw the almost like the sadness and the quality that SQ was, still loving Mr. Curtin even
Mm-hmm.
after all of the terrible things Mr. Curtin had done to him.
Almost like Stockholm
Stockholm,
syndrome.
yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
got that Stockholm syndrome quality to it, and that was really sad to me. But other than that, I think they nicely wrapped up the book. I just didn't prefer seeing all of those kind of terrible qualities that this character that you like SQ and stuff like that, didn't really get the happy ending that they deserve.
Well, SQ is a criminal.
Yeah,
He
but
is
I
kinda,
think I feel like in his heart he has very good intentions. And
Mhm.
I think because of all the mind wipe or brain sweeping that had been done with Mr. Curtin, you don't get to see that as strongly. And because of the Stockholm. So I think before all of that, he wouldn't have been a criminal. He would have been a good guy. But because of the
Oh, absolutely.
brain sweeping, because of the Stockholm syndrome, he was corrupted essentially. And I
Mhm.
think it was sad that even though he had like a redemption arc with the fact that he wouldn't hurt the children, he didn't truly get a redemption.
That's true, because he's like, he's like, I will help you, but I won't hurt them,
Mhm.
kind of thing. He kind of like reached this moral middle ground, which might have been all he was like, the only decision he was capable of making at that moment in time. I don't know. I wish that it hadn't just been left at like, oh, it's the power of love and it's so beautiful and like he's like his father and he's like his son, because I wish SQ just had like this come to Jesus moment kind of thing where he like had I wish that he had that moment of clarity where it's like, wait a minute, what he did to me was fucked up
Mhm.
and I don't have to owe my love to this person. I wish he had that internal healing
I
kind of.
wish he had had that in the second book instead of them locking him up and leaving him. Because
That
they
one
kind of
hurt.
turned, yeah, they turned on him and he was just trying to help them.
I don't know. I just wish that it could have gotten more into the themes of like, just because you like someone loves you and you have loved them doesn't mean you have to continue loving them if it is not a healthy relationship, because they may love each other, but it is not a healthy relationship. Where is his therapy? Where is it? Quarterly
He
therapy. Me in my office, 9 a.m. Monday sharp.
he needs a lot of it. The other thing with the end of the book that I liked was the fact that Constance did get rid of Mr. Benedict's narcolepsy.
Hmm.
However, it was definitely unrealistic with the fact that she had the ability to do that. But
Once again, a Deus Ex Machina moment.
yes. But the fact that it ended kind of that whole plot line with the fact that he read the whole note about her hating his green plaid outfits that he wore daily and he just laughed at it the whole time. I thought that was very sweet.
I think it's very sweet too. I do like
It was very much a them moment.
it was pretty cute. I like that he's not mad at her for sarcasm. I
Hmm.
think that's a very good matchup for her.
She needed it.
Can we talk about the upcoming film adaptation?
Absolutely.
So I don't know if you've seen the trailer, but I've seen the trailer.
I did watch it.
Okay, so this episode should be dropping on the date that it airs. It might not. I don't know. It's supposed to air on June 25th.
And it's going to be on Disney Plus, if I'm correct, is the episode, the
Yes.
TV show.
Which, once again, that conversation that we were having earlier about Disney and orphans, I don't know if it's entirely a coincidence.
It kind of fits.
It fits, doesn't it?
It does.
I have some things to say about the design choices of the world and also the casting choices. I think the kids are cast beautifully, but I do wonder if they intend to age up Constance a la Percy Jackson the movies. Because remember, like in the first Percy Jackson movie, they were like, "You're not 12 anymore, you're 16," and they had to change the prophecy in Sea of Monsters
Right. I think,
to be 20 instead of 16.
yeah. I think they have to age her up, mostly for a couple of reasons. One, it's very clear in the trailer that she is not 2 years old. She's far
Mhm.
too big even to like coincidentally be two, because they could have tried like for 5-year-old that was small, maybe. I don't know. The
But
other
then
thing,
again, child actors are so difficult.
so different. Well, they're all
Not only
child
with like
actors.
what?
They're all child actors,
No, I know, but like
but like
in terms
younger
of
children.
labor laws, it would have been, I'm sure, even more difficult to get a younger child because I think laws are stricter the younger you go. So
But
they probably just like,
Disney has
I
done that
bet.
before because they did that
What?
with Good Luck. I said Disney has done that before. They've done that with like Good Luck Charlie and stuff like that, where they've had these tiny, toddler kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think they had a really young one for Dog with a Blog also.
Mm-hmm. But it's not. I feel like because they play such like a center stage, and it's like because like in things like Good Like Charlie, you had like Teddy and PJ and Gabe to like focus on, and like Charlie was just kind of like this side character,
Hmm.
but Constance is like a main player
Hmm.
kind of thing. So I feel like they're gonna make her like 4 or 5, which I can accept.
I can accept that. But even with the actress they chose, it seemed like she was older than that.
She's 11, I believe. I believe the actress that they cast to play Constance is 11. And she was also in the series of Unfortunate Events, the Netflix series that they came out with. I don't know what character she played in that. I probably should since I'm talking about it. So casting choice of Constance was one thing that I wanted to talk about. Casting choice of number 2. Did not picture Kristen Schaal. I thought that was quite interesting. I never pictured her as like a Kristen Schaal type, more of like an Amy Sedaris type. I don't know if I'm like alone in that, but I pictured her as like kind of in her 30s. I'm probably totally wrong.
Well, they were supposed to be younger because they were children that Mr. Benedict had raised. So Rhonda was the youngest. She was just out of childhood, so she was probably 18 to 20 range. And number 2 was a little bit older than that, so she was probably in her later 20s.
Yeah, Kristen Schaal makes sense from like that respect, but it doesn't match up with what was in my head, so they're wrong.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say about that. And then
I definitely feel
Tony Hale as Mr. Benedict.
Yeah, that was weird.
That one's weird. I think he's going to bring a lot of humor and light to the role, because you have to remember he's not only playing Mr. Benedict, he's also playing
Mr. Curtin.
Which I think makes sense. That makes a whole lot more sense just based off like
Yeah, the only thing is I felt like look-wise he didn't fit because he didn't have that old grandpa feel that Mr. Benedict kind of has.
I always pictured him kind of portly, you know? Kind of Santa Claus-y.
Yes. Well, because they describe him in that way with, the big nose and the white hair kind of thing and all of that. So, yeah. I don't think he's going to be bad, though. I think he's just different.
Yeah.
The thing
Which, I'm totally for. Like, I think it could be really amazing, the work that he puts out. I just hope that the script is good. Because
that's gonna make it or break it.
Right. Like, I feel like I'm glad that they're going with like a TV show format for this series, because the way that it's written is very episodic, especially the first book, because it's like, after like the exposition where they like take the test and are given their mission, it's like scout for information, have a meeting in the night. Scout for information, have a meeting in the night kind of thing. So it does make sense that it's like a TV show, and I'm very happy that they went with that instead of a film, because that would have been not good. But there was something that they said in the trailer where it's like Mr. Benedict was already aware of like the situation on the island, and he already knew he had a brother. And it's like, okay, I understand why they'd retcon that in though.
Yeah, he didn't realize in the books beforehand that he had a brother that was on the island that was doing all of this. But in the trailer, they gave it away immediately. Like, that was one of the surprises for the children, was they walked in and there's Mr. Benedict again, and they're like, we just left you on the island. And then they realize it's a completely different person. And they're like, well, who is this person? And they have to solve the Gemini riddle to figure it out. And they can't do that if they've already been told. So it'll be interesting to see, how they're going to change things, because they've already made that change to the story.
Yeah, didn't they also make Mr. Curtin bald?
Yes.
In the trailer?
Yeah.
I don't know how they're going to pull off the end of book 1 then, because the whole point is Mr. Benedict takes his place.
Well, I mean, obviously they're just going to have Mr. Benedict shave his head.
Oh yeah, he brought the clippers with him to the island.
He brought the clippers, or he just randomly has a bald cap around in his head, in his house.
Yeah.
He's just, let me just slip this on real quick.
I bet that's how they're going to do it if they write it that way. I don't know if they're going to write it that way.
I definitely think that it's going to be very different, and I think that people are going to have to view the TV show as the TV show and not as the book to be able to enjoy it, just from how many changes are already made within the trailer.
Yeah, like the Percy Jackson movies, because I had not read the books, loved the movie. Read the books, hated the movie.
Yes, I will agree with that. I had not watched the movie or read the books before I watched the movie, and I loved the movie. And then I heard what happened in the books, and I was like, oh, that's not right.
And they turned the pearls into like a fucking plot device. Anyway, we're not talking about Percy Jackson right now. We're talking about The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. I like the banter that the kids have going on with each other, looking from the trailer.
I definitely think it's going to be very comedic and lighthearted for the parts that they need it to be. I'm curious to see how kind of like dark they're going to make the more evil plots seem. Because in the book, they get pretty dark feeling.
Like, again, Kate gets the shit beat out of her. Like, bloodied and bruised, literally beaten to a pulp. And I just cannot imagine Disney doing something like that.
There's no way.
I don't know. I can easily imagine The Waiting Room. I think they're going to definitely do that, but I cannot imagine them beating up a child like that.
I don't want to see The Waiting Room in video. Like, just
I
imagining
can imagine it so clearly how they're going to do it. I think they're going to do it very well.
I can see that happening. I imagine The Waiting Room in my head, and it like grosses me out. I'm like, don't want it. And then I'm like, I'm gonna have to actually watch that happen.
Mm-hmm. I don't have any other notes to say about the trailer, but that's just my notes on the trailer. Of course, have not seen it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Can't wait to watch it when it comes out, and I will be criticizing it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
That's the end of my film diversion.
All right. Well, if you were to rate these books, you can either rate individual books or the book series as a whole, what would you give it?
8.5 out of 10.
Okay.
For the whole series.
Where did it lose points?
Probably the telepathy, like we talked about. Kind of just like takes you out of the realistic narrative of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The pacing of the third book,
mm-hmm.
and a little bit in the second book too, I'd say. Probably takes it down a few notches. But overall, would highly recommend. Would give this as a gift to any child in my life who likes to read. And I would hope that they read it. Because I found it very enjoyable as a child and an adult, and I hope that they would too. What about you? What do you rate it?
I usually do out of 5. I would have given it a solid 4 out of 5. I loved the first and second books. The third book lost it a little bit for me with the pacing, just because, again, I felt like they were just a little bit trapped and there wasn't anywhere for them to go, and it felt like it kind of bogged the story down because of it, which I get. That was kind of the whole plot of the book, was that they were trapped. But yeah, I lost a little bit of points for that one for me. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and books I thoroughly enjoy get a 4 out of 5. So
excellent.
I would recommend it to people. I would also give it to children in my life. I feel like they would read it and enjoy it. So
all right, that is a wrap on our review and discussion of The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. If you like this podcast, we're planning to post every other week on Friday. That is bi-weekly on Friday, not twice a week, every 2 weeks. And we also have a TikTok on her if you want to plug that.
Yeah, so I make most of the TikTok videos. Chloe will be featured also, but that is Young Adult Reviews on TikTok. Follow us, like our videos. We post fun book content. We post, honestly, anything book related. So enjoy. And that's all I got.
We also have an Instagram.
And a YouTube.
The same handle. There's probably not many posts on it as of right now, but there will be soon. So if you
follow us.
If you like book content, follow us. Give us a follow and a like.
We will be giving teasers for our next book podcast. You can follow us and get the sneak peeks.
You can also drop suggestions. Maybe we'll read it, maybe we won't, and you can get fucked. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap on the podcast and a book. We could do like a little book closing sound. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.